Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Lemley. I want to welcome everyone to this morning's web seminar about increasing access to the Earned Income Tax Credit among transition-age youth. We are very excited about today's presentation. I have a lot of great information to share with you. So I think with that, let's jump right in and get started. Before we do, however, we want to put some information on the screen. Sometimes people can have difficulty accessing audio, and we often get the question, where will these materials be posted? So they will be posted on our organizational website, as you see it on your screen. We'll also, for all registrants, we'll send out the materials with a link to the archived materials. The best part of these web seminars, however, is always your questions. We're providing general information, but you are working with young people in the field, and that always makes the conversation much more rich. So we do encourage you, as you hear something, if you have a question, if you want us to go deeper, send that question right when you hear it in the question portion of the control panel, and we will make sure to cover as much as we can. So today, joining us for the presentation, and myself, Amy Lemley, with John Burton Advocates for Youth. Then we will hear from Monisha Campus with the California Department of Community Services and Development. We'll also hear from Adam Gosney, who's going to walk us through some of their tremendous online resources that you can actually sit down with a young person, walk them through, and experience this tremendous benefit program together. And then we're very happy to have Catherine Nicholas from the California Department of Social Services. So it's a really great lineup, and we're excited to share this information with you. Now, some of you, you might be thinking, why are we talking about the Earned Income Tax Credit in transition-age youth? Isn't that something for older people? But the reality is that we have many, many young people in California that can tremendously benefit from the Earned Income Tax Credit. On the far left, we have over 1.5 million 18 to 24-year-olds enrolled in college in California. These are younger people, younger workers, often could file taxes, could access this benefit, but aren't. And so for some of you who we've conducted outreach with, you're with the CSU system or the UC system or our fabulous community college system. So we are hoping that you will be ambassadors to take this information back to the students that you work with, educate them about it, and encourage them to file those taxes, get the rebates they're legally entitled to, which could potentially include the Earned Income Tax Credit. Now, the middle image really is our almost 1,000 parenting, it should say dependents. Some of them are non-minors and some of them are minors. But we have, as many of you know, California extended its foster care system to age 21 in 2010, implemented in 2012. And so now we have a large, active community of young people who are actually in foster care, who are custodial parents themselves. And these young people, for me personally, are just ground zero for the Earned Income Tax Credit. When preparing this presentation, I did outreach to a parenting dependent, a former dependent. She's no longer a dependent, but she was a young parent while she was in foster care, and she had never received the Earned Income Tax Credit. So if I had any doubt that this kind of outreach is important, that really redoubled my commitment. So if you're listening, if you have any contact with a young parent in foster care, this is mission critical for them. This is access to a resource. And we know there aren't that many of them. They're scattered far and wide. But you might be a worker who knows of a maternity group home, or you might be someone who has a young person on your caseload. Anything you can do to be that connective tissue to these young, vulnerable families really makes a difference. And then thirdly, we're talking about the Earned Income Tax Credit in TAY because we have almost 20,000 children and youth in California who are placed with relatives. Now, we know these relatives are disproportionately low income, and they're most likely eligible for the state and federal Earned Income Tax Credit. And so the more outreach we do about the EITC, the more we're going to be able to touch the transition-age youth themselves and also touch the big community of people that they are connected to, and that is our almost 20,000 relative caregivers. So that's really our goal today, is to move outside of our child welfare and maybe post-secondary education or homeless youth silo and bring this information about this credit to these different constituencies and find a way to infuse information about the earned income tax credit into our different systems. And so to do that, we're going to be talking about a few different things. We're going to start off with some great information about the importance of filing taxes generally, because of course you can't get these great benefits if you don't file taxes. Then we'll move into a more detailed conversation about the EITC. Then I will talk about some issues related to transition age youth. And we'll also talk about strategies to increase EITC outreach. These are practical things that can be done on the ground at the conclusion of this presentation to make that connection with young people. And then we'll wrap up the web seminar by conducting a Q&A session. So again, we're really delighted and grateful. This entire presentation came about because of the outreach of the California Department of Community Services and Development. They reached out to our organization and they work very closely with the California Department of Social Services. So we're very fortunate to have this kind of state leadership that's committed to ensuring access to the EITC. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Manisha, who's going to really present the bulk of today's content and tell us about her great organization and about the EITC state and federal.
Good morning, everyone. As Amy said, my name is Monisha Campus. I'm with Community Services and Development, and we call ourselves CSD for short. So a little bit about CSD. So what our mission is that we strive to reduce poverty for Californians through the development and coordination of programs. And so we like to consider ourselves, partners against poverty. So we manage a number of state and federally funded programs to achieve our mission of reducing poverty in California. For example, we oversee the Community Services Block Grant, and we call this one CSBG for short. The CSBG is designed to provide a wide range of services to assist low-income families and individuals attain the skills and knowledge and motivation necessarily to produce self-sufficiency. Many of these different programs range from employment services, education, income support, management, housing, emergency services, health, and nutritional services, just to name a few. We also oversee utility assistance, weatherization of homes, and renewable energy, like solar panels, solar hot waters, water heaters, energy efficient measures, etc. If you would like to learn more about CSD and what we do here, our website is located here on the slide. Go ahead and type it in and look us up. Next slide, please. So you guys may be asking, what is the importance of filing taxes? Youth may receive a refund even if they do not qualify for the EITC. Also, the importance of filing taxes is that you're utilizing a volunteer income tax assistance site. And we're going to get more into VITA later, but basically VITA is a place where individuals can go and get their taxes prepared for free. And you do not have to claim the EITC in order to be able to use a VITA volunteer site. So if you have a young person, they want to get their taxes filed, they do not have to claim the EITC in order to be able to use a VITA site. Filing taxes also builds financial literacy skills. It can help develop independence and self-sufficiency. It can help a youth with goal setting, develop those executive functioning skills, and it can also serve as a motivator. Why am I setting these goals? Why do I want to move up in the world? Why do I want to advance in my career? Just for some information, the deadline to file taxes is April 17th, 2018. Next slide. And so with the Earned Income Tax Credit, CSD, our role here is that we want to increase the awareness of the EITC in California. CSD efforts have included funding CSBG agencies' efforts to expand EITC outreach and free tax preparation sites, as well as funding public service announcements. And one of the major things that CSD is doing right now is that we oversee grantees throughout the state of California, and their role is to conduct education outreach specifically for the Earned Income Tax Credit. So we assist them with, identifying the most effective outreach strategies. We have coordination with them throughout the state just to get the word out about Earned Income Tax Credit, and that is CSD's role with this effort. Next slide. So a little bit about the EITC federal background. There are some differences between the federal and state EITC. The federal EITC, for example, was first enacted in 1975 and is a benefit administered by the Internal Revenue Service that provides a cashback refund for working individuals and families with low to moderate income. The federal EITC is widely regarded as one of the nation's most powerful tools for lifting low-income people out of poverty. In 2013, the EITC lifted more than 5.3 million people out of poverty, which includes more than 2.7 million children and almost 1.5 million adult women. So as you guys can see, the federal EITC is pretty powerful with assisting Californians and people in poverty. Next slide. So along with the federal EITC, we also have the California state EITC, and these two differ. The California state EITC was first enacted in 2015, and this was the state's first ever California Earned Income Tax Credit. And then recently, over the years, the credit has actually been able to expand. Now, for the upcoming year, it includes self-employed workers can now claim the EITC where in previous years they weren't able to. And also the income eligibility has also increased. And similar to the federal EITC, tax filers with 3 or more qualifying dependents may claim the largest credit, and filers with 1 or 2 dependents receive less. And as you guys can see here on the slide, here we have that lets you know kind of what is qualifying. So your number of qualifying children, your maximum income, and then how much you're able to receive back is here on the slide. And we'll get into that too in further detail throughout the presentation. Next slide. And so throughout this presentation, we've been speaking a lot about poverty and really wanting to get young people and families out of poverty. And so there are health benefits for claiming the California EITC. Research has shown that every single additional dollar a low-income Californian can make in a year increases their health. So for example, a California endowment study revealed that every additional $12,500 in household income literally buys an additional year of life expectancy. For example, the study highlighted how in Alameda County, a single standard deviation above the poverty line can mean up to a 25% increase in life expectancy. And so it's kind of obvious, but if you increase the income levels, that has tremendous effects on your health. Those two things can go hand in hand. And also here on the graph here on the right-hand side, this shows a breakdown per county of how many returns are unclaimed. And so you can see down here that these numbers are pretty large. And this is the amount of money that has been left on the table that people have not claimed. Next slide. And then so the EITC, it gives a big boost to the incomes of families. And as you can see here on the screen, it shows you how the federal and the California EITC, how it actually increases the income for people and for families. I mean, some can get a 69% increase, 83% increase, a 92% increase it's only possible because of the Earned Income Tax Credits. Thank you. And so overall, the California EITC, it has a huge economic impact, not only on the impact that it's going to have for the individual who is claiming it, but can also have an impact for our economy overall. So here you can see that it generated a total economic impact of over $247.1 million in business sales, supported over 1,595 jobs, creating more than $86.4 million in labor income, and it generated $15.4 million in tax revenue. And then here for Sacramento County alone, county claims $10.2 million, which really has positive effects on the economy. It generates a total economic impact of $12.9 million in business sales, supported more than 84 jobs, and creating more than $4.5 million in labor income. And that's just for Sacramento alone. So you can imagine the powerful impact that this has statewide. Next slide. And so there was some research conducted about who are those individuals who are not claiming the EITC refund? Why are their money still left on the table? So we have shown that characteristics associated with high rates of unclaimed EITC funds are in areas with high concentration of Hispanics, among individuals with lower incomes than eligible, individuals who filed a tax refund to get the federal EITC, among individuals who participated in food stamp assistance programs, and among those with no qualifying children. So these are the characteristics of those who are not filing the EITC credit. The average proportion of individuals not claiming the federal EITC credit is 25%. Next slide. And so the federal EITC, now we just took some time to speak about the actual economic impact that claiming the EITC has on the economy. But for those numbers of unclaimed credits, that's a foregone economic impact. And so here we can say that in 2015 near 1.1 million Californians left around 1.9 billion in federal EITC payments. So this was money that was left on the table. This is money that was available for individuals to receive, but yet they did not claim it. And so the foregone economic impact is huge. So there's over 2.3 billion in business sales that were lost, over 14,500 additional jobs not generated or supported, and more than 800 million in wages or labor income, which is lost. Next slide, please. And so now Adam is going to go ahead and take us over some resources.
Thank you so much, Monisha. So one thing we're going to be doing today is showing some screenshots from the website caliitcforme.org. We wanted to include in the screenshots that way you all can view this at any point in time, and it's easy to peruse looking through the presentation, but feel free to also peruse the website as I review the screenshots. I'm going to review 5 in particular parts of the website that are really helpful, which is maintained by the Golden State Opportunity Foundation, which is a nonprofit partner we work with. I'm going to be talking about the eligibility calculator, the interactive heat map, the tax preparation finder tool, some question and answers, and also partner toolkits and community snapshots. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. Next slide, please. So first, we're going to talk about the eligibility calculator. It's a pretty simple tool that you can go in and type in some pretty simple information about your tax filing status to figure out, one, if you're eligible, and then also how much you might be able to claim. We all know taxes are pretty complicated, so it does not guarantee eligibility, but one thing about this tool is that it gives you a really easy snapshot to go in, and it's easily found on the CalITC from your website. You just type in your filing status, how much qualifying children you have, how much earned income you have, any additional information, and then just checking off the eligibility requirements, and then you click the orange button at the bottom, and it breaks it down by California EITC and federal EITC. Next slide, please. And the next is the interactive heat map. So this is actually very beneficial if you're looking to figure out more about what Manisha was discussing about people leaving EITC claims on the table. So you can break this down by geographies, you can break it down by zip code, legislative district, census tract, and you can type in zip codes, cities, neighborhoods, and find out specifically how many people in that particular area are not claiming EITC. So if you want to dive more into your specific region, this is a great tool. I highly recommend it. Again, very easy findable on caliitcforme.org. Next slide, please. And the next is the Tax Prep Finder tool. I'm going to go into more detail on this very shortly when we talk more about voluntary income tax assistance. But this is a very easy, simple tool where you can type in an address and find out where to file your taxes for free in the nearest location. So next slide. And this is questions about EITC. So when you go to the website, you'll see each one of these are a pretty simple Q&A drop down. One thing we all know, as I said before, is that taxes can be pretty complicated. EITC for me and Golden State Opportunity have done a great job to simplify the process a little bit and mainly get people to these tax preparation sites so that way they do file their taxes. Next slide, please. And then, of course, resources. So for partners like yourself, for fact sheets, information like am I eligible, really simple things. And also, there's also community partner snapshots here that break down everything from county to zip code to neighborhood to, again give you a more localized, personal touch. We would be here just for an hour just covering the different resources on this portion of the website. So I heavily encourage you to visit that link and check it out for yourself. Next slide, please. And so going back to voluntary income tax assistance, like we were saying before, it's not only important that people claim EITC and file their taxes, but they get to keep their money. So in 2013, 53% of those claiming EITC used a paid preparer. And there are, which is a shame because there are free voluntary income tax assistance sites or VITA sites that can be claimed for people who are not claiming EITC. And when you think about the average tax preparation fee being almost $300, that's a major incentive. And all people need to do is they make less than $54,000 a year, they can do that. And so you can either call the IRS number listed on the screen, or if you go back to that VITA Prep tool, if we go to the next slide, again, you can just type in your address and it'll pull up the different sites that are near your area. And this is a live tax prep finder, so it's constantly updated. So the sites you see on here are currently open. So for example, if you check this in 6 months in the middle of June and say you find someone that hasn't filed their taxes, they can still file it because they didn't need to. It would actually show the sites that are still open and still running year round. So that way it's kind of nice from some of the other tax prep finders that maybe be outdated as the year goes on. Next slide. So I'm going to go ahead and pause there. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll hand it back to Manisha.
Thank you, Adam. So you guys may be asking, okay, we're getting all this information about this earned income tax credit. You know, what's the point? The point of it is that EITC decreases poverty. And we know that, sadly, many of our transitional age youth and their families actually experience poverty. And so by increasing the awareness of the EITC, it in return then increases health. So we want a healthier population. We want a healthier state. And so what we found out through our work with during the education outreach is that word of mouth is the most powerful tool for outreach. And so by that, we've discovered that it's, you know, having a trusted community. So those community-based messengers are the key to informing young people about the advantages of filing taxes. So those people who are working one-to-one with young people, who are doing, you know, home visits, who are working with them on their plans, you are the individuals that are going to have the most powerful effect in the lives of these young people. And so we really want to get this information out to make sure that we are reaching these young people and getting the message across by individuals who they trust. And sadly, thinking about transitional age youth, unfortunately, many of these young people, once they get to this age, they've had several people that they've met throughout their lifetime, whether they're changing placements, whether it's a change in social workers. So if they have individuals in their life that they trust, you providing them with this information is going to be the most helpful to them. Next slide. So we worked with the Department of Public Health, And what they did is they worked with their health advocate to do home visiting. And this is something that they have adopted from their department in response to EITC. So what they do is that they are tracking referrals throughout their department. And so some of the criteria that they have is for the home advocates to see have they received have the clients received information about the free text prep finder? Did they give them the information about the tracking the referral? Did they claim the EITC? Did they get did they claim the money and get it back? And so this is all information that their actual health advocates are doing. Next slide. And so this is something that the Department of Health have used internally. And so here, what you see here on the scene is this is their internal tracking the referral system. And so the employees go in and they use this database to track whether they inform their participant about EITC. Next slide. And so one thing that they also do is that they are updating the status on the participants on a regular basis. Next slide. And so one thing that I thought was really interesting and helpful that the Department of Health, what they did is that the home advocates, they have to go in and provide documentation, whether it be session notes or, what they're working on with the individual. And so what they have done is they built in the tracking referral system directly into the documentation that's already needed. So not only do they document, hey, I went and spoke to this individual and gave them information about EITC, but they also follow up and update how much did they claim, what did they spend the money on, how was that EITC impactful in that individual's life, and what actual positive change did it make for that individual. And so we really want to make sure that this education about the EITC isn't just a one-stop shop. Hey, here's information, that's it. And so if other individuals can adopt something like this, I think it'd be really helpful because it helps you know how many people have we spoken to about this? Is it really changing lives? And if we need to improve on this education and outreach, what do we need to do to actually improve on a method? So I was very impressed by this. Next slide. And then for the Black Infant Health, what they did is they created an overall goal for their department. So their goal, they put a time frame on it, and that they wanted to screen 80% of currently active women for EITC. So as a department, they said, hey, we want to make sure that we are going out there and that we are speaking to 80% of our participants to make sure that they are receiving information about EITC. And I highly recommend setting a goal, because I think a goal can make it tangible, and it can make it, I think real, and you can then modify, you can track, you can just make it more systematic and streamlined to actually make something happen. Next slide. So now I am going to go ahead and pass it over to Amy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, the way I look at this often is, those of us who are involved in child welfare, we often deal with different benefit programs, be they SSI or foster care. And if there were a benefit program that were funded to the tune of $1.5 billion, we would all be extremely activated towards ensuring our communities access it. There's something about this because it's a tax credit that feels different. It feels, and maybe that's the success of the program, because it isn't talked about as a poverty benefit program. But in some ways, something about it is a little bit different. And so part of what we're trying to do is challenge us to rethink how we think about it as a benefit program. And so the next part of our presentation today is try and step through some of the common issues that are faced by transition age youth, so that we can, remove some of those barriers and help people see how young people can access them. Because as we all know, particularly in child welfare, you might go to that site, they might not know about foster care benefits, or they might assume that it's a minor child living with an adult foster parent. So we want to just clear up some of those things so you can send your young people to those VITA sites, armed with information and empowered to really feel ready to claim this great benefit. So the first one is, how are foster care benefits treated? And the great news is they are not treated as income for the purposes of state or federal taxes. So when a young person, young person obviously won't get a W-2 for them. This is not income. And so that includes the supervised independent living payment, which is paid directly to the young person. Now, if you sat down with someone, they were helping with your taxes, they might say, well, what money do you get? And a young person might say, well, I get this benefit payment paid to me, but this is not income for the purposes of federal and state income tax. Neither is the infant supplement or any portion of THP plus foster care, as well as the basic rate. And so you don't, young people and no one else needs to feel like they have any tax liability for that benefit program. And so just being clear for all of us that that is not to be taxed, it's not taxable income, and there's no tax liability for that whatsoever. The next issue, and I don't know why my presentation is looking a little funny here, and this is something I've personally experienced working with young people, is getting those W-2s. Particularly when young people are, older, like 18 to 21, there is movement, they do move, they may not be in the same place where they listed when they were employed. And so, a young person may have every intention to do their taxes, but when you sit down to do it with them, they don't have the materials that they need to complete the forms. And so this is one reason we wanted to try and get this training in as soon as possible. First, obviously contact the employer, and everyone should have gotten their W-2s by January 31st. The first recourse is, if you didn't get it, to ask the employer to reissue it. Then you move on to the IRS, and the slide has an 800 number where you can contact the IRS, get that information sent directly to you. That's most likely going to require a Social Security number to provide, as well as some type of additional information. But the sooner we can make those requests to get the W-2s, the sooner they can land in our mailboxes, and we can actually complete the paperwork. And you can also, young people can file their return estimating income and withholding as accurately as possible. And that's not the end of the world. I mean, we'd love it if everyone has a nice, crisp W-2 with the perfect information. But if you have that pay stub, the last pay stub, and many of us get them electronically now, you can get extremely accurate information. And so that is another option. But we want to press through and try to prevent any placement changes from preventing a young person from getting the W-2. And particularly now that CARE now goes to age 21, when we think about a placement change or any kind of move, how do we think also about were you going to get any W-2s at your old address? And again, this is about when the average age of a foster youth was maybe 8 or 10, it wasn't part of our sensibility. But now that we have almost 9,000 18 to 21-year-olds in our foster care system, at least, it's a sensibility that we want to build in. Another common issue is just confusion about the filing status. Those of us who are old and, seasoned tax completers, it's very, very straightforward in terms of these words that are on the screen are very simple. But for young people, it's extremely intimidating, and that fear can be like, well, I'm just not going to do it. I don't think I even earn enough. It doesn't really matter. And the reality is they might not earn enough to be required to file taxes, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't get a refund or that they wouldn't get the EITC, particularly if they're parents. So the more we can help them be conversant on what their filing status is, they can feel confident knowing they're doing this correctly, and that they're not doing it wrong and they're not going to get in any trouble. I think there's a lot of kind of reticence and fear around taxes, and young people don't want to do anything that's going to get them in trouble. And so the two on the left are the most common ones. Single filing status, that's just unmarried on the last day of the calendar year, or head of household filing status. That's single and have been taking care of a dependent for more than 6 months. And that one has a higher standard deduction and lower tax rates. So that's really when we think about young parents, that's going to be the filing status that most of our young parents qualify for. Another issue is just how this relates to being a parent in terms of, all right, I'm a young parent, I want to claim the EITC. Is my partner going to claim the EITC? Can we share this benefit? Kind of what's the story there? And the IRS and the state are clear that the custodial parent claims all the child-related tax benefits, including the EITC. So this is not split. Like if there were a custody agreement, it goes to one parent or the other. But it does have a special rule that allows the non-custodial parent to claim the dependency exception if the custodial parent releases the exemption. So I think the most common scenario, that second one, it's on the books, but the more common one is the custodial parent. And again, I think about our young parents, the one who has custody of the child is going to be the individual who claims the child-related tax benefits, and that includes the EITC. So that's just some very straightforward information about that. Now, we all know many of our young people, more and more, which we're all very excited about, are getting financial aid because they're attending college. And so a question there is, so what is financial aid? How is that addressed in taxes? Now, the great news is the professionals at the VITA sites are very well versed in this. Millions and tens of millions of people get state and federal financial aid, and so this is not nearly as rare as foster care benefits. But this is a little bit of a 101 just for those of you out there working with students, so that you have a general sense of how financial aid is treated. So essentially it's divided into taxable financial aid and non-taxable financial aid. Taxable, even though you might get work study as part of your financial aid package, income earned through work study is taxable. A grant or scholarship above the amount paid for a qualified educational expense, and we'll talk more about that on the next slide, and any other earned income. So what's not taxable is any grant, provided it is only used for a qualified educational expense, and any government student loan is not taxable, obviously, because you're going to pay it back. So the key thing for financial aid is, what is a qualified educational expense? Any grant that you spend on that is not taxable. Anything above and beyond that is taxable. And so this next slide is a very basic breakdown about what a qualified educational expense is. It's tuition, it's fees that are required for enrollment, course materials, student activity fees. And so, any portion of financial aid that is paid towards those specific costs is not taxable. However, the portion of grants and financial aid that are paid above and beyond that are taxable, and that includes things: room and board, insurance, medical expenses, transportation, personal or living expenses. And so, you might imagine, let's say you get the Cal grant, you get the Pell grant, and let's say you get the Chafee grant, and imagine you go to a CSU. Well, the combination of those three things is probably going to be more than the qualified educational expenses. So some portion will be taxable and some portion will be non-taxable. And so there's a pretty straightforward process for determining that. That's not something that a young person has to, determine on their own. But for the purposes of this web seminar, the key issue is that which is received to cover those qualified educational expenses is not taxable, but when you go above and beyond those, that is taxable income. And so those are just a few key, kind of things that pertain to transition age youth. And now I'm going to turn it over to Catherine from the California Department of Social Services to give us some ideas about how we can take this information into our communities to ensure that it actually reaches young people.
Okay, so we're just going to spend just a couple minutes talking about some EITC outreach that could be specific for the TAY population. We're going to talk about three kind of main categories of it, and this can definitely relate to everybody listening in. County staff, especially when talking about the independent living program, would be a great conduit for getting this information out to our families and our young people. But it can definitely be extrapolated more than just the county staff. It could be the providers that are in a community, CASAs, really any advocates can work with these same themes to really get this information out. So one huge conduit would be the independent living programs. Every county has an independent living program for their TAY youth. There is statewide expectations for the curriculum. However, counties do have the ability to kind of create a curriculum that's really tailored to the demographics of their county. But no matter what that, the specific classes look like, the curriculum can include lessons and workshops on how to file taxes. That's a really great basic way to start. Especially experiential workshops can be held at a VITA site. For instance, a lot of ILP classes will do field trips or take young people to the DMV to look at how to apply for a license. Kind of that same experiential education can be used by taking young people to a VITA site, having them bring their W-2s and helping them, learn how to just file their taxes and really expose them to taxes in general, and then moving on to the EITC. Another big way that independent living programs, really anybody that works with those programs at the county or any contracted providers, can reach out about EITC is to include financial literacy and tax preparation, and the counties can do it on the Transitional Independent Living Plan, or their TILP. Number 8 on enclosure B of the TILP is ILP money management, and one of the descriptions under this is that it can include helping the young person access information about taxes and filling out tax forms. This is a really big benefit because this isn't just an informal outreach. This is a way to really kind of codify into that young person's independent living program, personal to them, and into their independent living transition plan, actual dedicated focus on the financial literacy that comes with filing taxes, and then therefore also stuff like the EITC and other tax breaks that they may be available for, or that they may be eligible for. Another thing that can really happen at the counties, it's a more informal outreach about EITC, is just getting the coordinators. Every one of our counties has an ILP coordinator. Some counties have more if they're a larger county. Just get them to start sharing messaging with the ILP workers, the county workers that are out there talking with the young people, meeting with them, recommending classes, helping them take them to certain classes. Really just getting information out there. This informal outreach about EITC, this word of mouth, is going to be one of the strongest ways to get information about tax preparation, EITC, and VITA to not just our TAY population, but the communities they live in, their foster caregivers, their friends, their peers, et cetera. Ways that this could be done is email blasts about upcoming VITA and EITC events. Adam Gosney here at CSD did go over some of our resources on the Cal EITC for Me webpage. And they do include that a couple updated links about what VITA events are going on. So looking and seeing if anything local is coming out and sending out that email blast to those ILP workers, both county workers and any contracted providers. And then also just making the resources available at the ILP offices or where ILP classes are held. There are resources that have been developed by the Franchise Tax Board, by some of our grantees like Golden State Opportunity, the ones available on Cal EITC for Me. You can also contact any of the presenters from CSD or myself from CDSS, and we would be happy to send you links or even mail out hard copies of resources, pamphlets, posters that can be hung, et cetera. Really just anything to get the message out there. Next slide, please. So another really great outreach point of entry for our TAY population is through our transitional housing population. We have a lot of young people, and especially a lot of our parenting non-minor dependents who have chosen to stay in extended foster care, and then even after extended foster care are choosing to continue utilizing some of the benefits that we have available for our former foster youth. can be found a lot at the transitional housing facilities found within each county. I mentioned the ILP coordinators at each county. Each of the county also has transitional housing coordinators. Again, one for at least every county, a couple more if the counties are larger. Doing the same thing with them with having the coordinators share the information with the transitional housing programs in the counties, doing that email blast that we talked about with independent living coordinators, sending out information about upcoming VITA sites. That would be really helpful. I am with the Transition Age Youth Policy Unit at the Department of Social Services, and my colleague Susan Zimney, who will be taking over as the TAY representative for this EITC outreach. Either one of us can be reached, and I'm happy to send out the information to everybody that's on this webinar. Either one of us can be reached if you do want to say something like, hey, could you send me out an email once a month to our ILP or transitional housing coordinators letting us know any upcoming events that are going on or any updated resources. And that way we could just send out the emails, and then that coordinator can know to just blast it out to all of those coordinators, all of the transitional housing workers, and all of our contracted providers to really get the information out. A lot of transitional housing programs offer workshops and classes on site. This would be an excellent venue to host a VITA event or other workshops on filing taxes and the benefits of EITC. You would kind of have that captive audience by having all the people that are living at that transitional housing site attending a class that's already on site and really be able to do follow-up information. So you aren't just doing the workshop where you let the people know about that. For those that are living in that transitional housing facility, there's the opportunity to follow up with them, you know, helping them apply, helping them get to a VITA site. Once they do apply, also helping have conversations with them about, if you get the EITC, what are you going to use that tax credit for, savings, et cetera. And then, like we talked about, having resources with independent living sites, also having EITC resources at the housing facilities. And a benefit, if possible, is to have a staff trained in how to help pay file their taxes, and then also for the EITC, having somebody on site who can help do that follow-up with the young person instead of just saying, this is what this is, now figure out how to go do it. But having somebody, you know, attend or go through the VITA training or something like that, that could really work with those young people would help make sure that there's follow-through for getting this done. Next slide, please. And the last one we're going to touch on briefly is, Amy had mentioned a lot about our parenting non-minor dependents. And while not every county has a parenting program coordinator, like we've talked about with transitional housing and independent living program, parenting programs or prenatal programs, et cetera, are really starting to pop up around counties as we get more and more parenting and pregnant minors and non-minor dependents. And so even if there is not an identified coordinator, what counties can do or county staff can do is identify a coordinator or a point person for programs for pregnant and parenting youth, somebody who maybe works in the unit that deals with them or who oversees different community programs and projects that help pregnant and parenting youth. Identify somebody who could be that resource person to get to be the point person to get the resources and really disseminate them amongst the county social workers who work with our pregnant and parenting non-minor dependents. Additionally, incorporating information and resources into parenting programs when discussing financial literacy and budgeting. I know that a lot of our pregnant and parenting non-minor dependents attend parenting classes as a part of their TILP or as a part of their transitional housing program. And I also know from firsthand experience that a lot of parenting programs and parenting curriculums that are offered in our child welfare communities focus a lot on the financial literacy component of being a parent. Being able to include conversation and information about the importance of filing taxes and benefits such as the EITC that they can apply for into those parenting programs would be an excellent way to reach out to these pregnant and parenting non-minor dependents. And another thing is coordinating with home visiting programs or other similar nonprofit or not-for-profit or any contracted provider resources in your counties. Again, a lot of pregnant and parenting non-minor dependents do have home visitation, whether it's through nursing or the Black Infant Health Program or through other child welfare sponsored programs, have home visitors to go into the homes with these young people to just kind of help them, prepare them for parenthood or help them survive parenthood and really make it work. And so providing resources to those programs to bring out so that that person could be talking with a young pregnant or parenting non-minor dependent in their home, being able to go over the resources in person could be a really powerful way to get that messaging out. That is all I have for the outreach. Amy, I don't know if you want to take it over if we're going to go to questions and answers, but I'll definitely remain here if we have any questions about outreach.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think it's really exciting to see, just a lot of commitment to trying to integrate this, to not have it be like, oh, let's remember taxes this year, but to, see a lot of great ideas about how to build this into our year-round infrastructure in serving young people. And your ideas about the TILP are just awesome. So we're going to now turn to Q&A, and there's a lot of good questions. And if you haven't had time to put one in, please do. So the first question we're going to have for an AB-12 youth, so that's a young person in extended foster care, that remained in the home of a foster parent, and the parent is receiving the monthly stipend for the foster care benefit. The foster parents are claiming the youth as the youth child as dependents are on their own taxes. Does that eliminate the possibility of the youth claiming the EITC on her taxes? She would not be able to claim head of household, correct? So the answer to that really depends on the age of the youth, and it depends on her student status. And so a family can claim, and this includes foster care, the foster parent, if the young person is a full-time student, they could be claimed up to age 24. But if they are not, the upper age is 19. So let's imagine in this scenario, the young person is 19. Then even though they're living as a foster home, as a foster youth in that home, that child would be able to be the head of household and would be able to file the taxes as such. If she were a full-time student, then her foster parents could. But I think that's something that is not something that should be determined by the foster parent. It's particularly for dependents. This is a conversation where we want to engage the child welfare worker, potentially their attorney, and try and think through the conversation and make a decision that's in the best interests of the foster youth and potentially their child. We know a lot of young people who are older in foster care are not living in a family setting, but if they are, that should ring a bell for those of us who work with those young people and say, what's your plan on your tax filing? Because it shouldn't be a working assumption that the foster parent gets that credit. I mean, if that's what's in the interests of the child and the family, but it's something that should be actively considered and not just assumed. This is a related question, and it said for an AB-12 youth that remained in the home of, this is a different one, sorry, is a young person who's in extended foster care who's just renting a room. So this, let's say, imagine a young person who's participating in extended foster care as a supervised independent living placement, rents a room. Would they be eligible to file taxes and they have a child as a head of household? And the answer to that is yes. Just because they are renting a room and not leasing an apartment independently, that doesn't change in any way their eligibility for filing taxes as a head of household or claiming this spectacular benefit. This next question is pretty straightforward one, and I think you covered it, but can we get the deadline again for the, Monisha, for the date to file taxes?
Yes, it is April 17th.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question is, if I already filed my taxes, would I still be eligible to receive the EITC? Monisha, would you like to take that, or we're happy to answer it on our end? Either way.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
If I already filed my taxes, like my 2017 taxes, would I be able to go back and still get the earned income tax credit?
It is to my understanding that you can go back and you can do an amendment and then you can go ahead and you can claim the EITC. Now, what I'm not 100% sure on is the deadlines and how long it takes for them to process an amendment to your taxes. But I do know that you can go back and claim it if you do qualify.
And just to expand on the question earlier, as far as what the deadline is for filing taxes, it is April 17th. However, if you have young people that are not going to be paying taxes, there really isn't a deadline. You can file all year round. Perfect. And that website, the Cal EITC for Me that you were taking through earlier, some of the volunteer income tax assistance sites, the VITA sites, have year-round schedules. So a young person can go and schedule an appointment through the VITA site.
All right, and one thing I'll just add to the filing back taxes is you can file taxes for up to 3 years. So the young person that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, who despite having a 5-year-old has never gotten the EITC, she could go back 3 years and potentially get, as much as $15,000 to $18,000 in credit. So this sounds like a big pain in the butt, honestly. And if I think about sitting down with a young person and claiming the EITC from years past, it wouldn't be something I would, sound like a lot of fun to do. But this is extremely, meaningful in that it can help young people access this benefit, and particularly young people who are getting close to age 21. They're getting close to moving out of extended foster care. They're getting close to losing that infant supplement. And they're really, at a very, very tenuous time in their transition. And so if you are working with a parenting foster youth who hasn't gotten that EITC, thinking about going back and doing a few years backwards may be something worth considering. So another question is, if a youth missed his or her 1098-T form through the mail, where can one retrieve that document? And so that's the form that is sent to students by the school that they attend that reports all of their scholarships and grants. And that is what they use to complete their taxes. And so in our follow-up materials, we will include the instructions for that. We have a website that we can share where young people can get that. Manisha, is there anything else you'd like to share about that?
No, I think you answered it 100% spot on. I would just go ahead and contact their schools. And then also, too, I know the IRS is a big resource. I know we put the Cal EITC for Me website up, but you can also coordinate with the local VITA sites. They're not only there to prepare your taxes, but they can also be a big resource for any tax-related questions that you have, as well as the IRS website as well.
Great. Another topic we want to cover, and this is something that many of us in the field do, is provide stipends to young people. And we can unwittingly be providing young people with tax liability. And so if you give over, $600 or more to an individual young person through a stipend, maybe because they're on your youth advisory board, maybe they're doing a little part-time work for you, that is reportable to the IRS, and then they are, required to pay income tax on that. This came up recently for an organization that I'm involved with. We're trying to think through how to structure participants of the Youth Advisory Board. But you want to be really careful that we're not leaving young people with the tax liability. And we can tell them to set some of it aside for their taxes, but the reality is, given their circumstances, they often won't. And so if we can employ them, actually bring them on the payroll, that is the better approach. It's an approach that's more expensive, for sure. But, we've seen situations of young people who did a little work for that group, and by the end, it kind of added up, and they had quite a bit of money that they had to pay taxes on. So being mindful of that, whatever strategy you choose to pursue, that we could unwittingly be leaving young people with a tax liability. So another question is, what is the minimum amount? Like, a lot of people are like, well, this is all great, but young people don't earn enough to have to pay taxes. When is it legally required to file taxes? The minimum income threshold, when Uncle Sam says you've got to file taxes. Manisha, do you want to cover that one? Or would you like us to?
You guys could go ahead and cover that one.
That one. And we looked this one up. This is $10,400. And so you might think, well, a young person didn't earn that much money. But again, when you look at their portion of financial aid that isn't covering those essential educational expenses, it's not too hard to hit that amount. And so you want to think through all of those sources of income. Again, we know it's not foster care. And if it is that amount, then that is when they're, legally obligated to file taxes. And so if they earn less than that, they still can file, and they're probably going to get every penny that they paid in federal and state income taxes back. So that certainly isn't like, if they don't earn more than that, let's not bother. We want, if you worked, file taxes. But if you worked and earned more than $10,400, then you really do have to file taxes. Here's another question. I'll send this one over. Is there a minimum amount of annual income to file for the EITC? Is there any minimum, Manisha, that applies to the EITC?
I do not believe that there is actually a minimum amount that applies, but I'm trying to look back on our slides.
Okay,
on slide, oh, go ahead, Amy, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say on slide number 10, it has all of the income amounts on there, showing that you need to make up to a certain amount. So anything underneath that threshold, you could still go ahead and apply.
Mm-hmm. And someone asked about the minimum or the amount that's required to file taxes. $10,400 was the amount there. Now we're looking at your interactive heat map here, and one can't help but see that the Central Valley is really the hot spot for some serious unclaimed EITC, and that also relates to the characteristics of individuals who are not claiming the EITC. And that makes one think that there's some relationship, some maybe fear around filing taxes and immigration and kind of citizenship status. So can you tell us anything about the EITC? And I do see that's one of the frequently asked questions around if someone has DACA status. Any guidance you can give people in the field about that, so that we can allay fears that, that filing taxes would somehow be, harmful in that regard?
We don't know 100% about how a DACA status relates to the EITC. That is something that's kind of outside of what we're doing for education outreach. But one thing, though, that we have come upon is that we have realized that people are leery about signing up for the EITC and for claiming their refund. There's been some worry even about the name and that it being a credit, and people misunderstanding what credit means. Are you giving me a line of credit? It's something that I need to be paid back. And we even found that there's even a stigma of saying, oh, low income or, someone in poverty. So we, as doing more of the outreach to getting the word out about the EITC, one thing that we have just been really strong in letting them know that this is something that can provide cash in your pocket that can positively impact your family. So, you can buy diapers, you can save, get your car worked on. And so we've been more pushing it on that end to let them know that these are the positive effects of it. However, we do not know the intricacies about how it relates to the DACA status 100%, because that's not something that we deal more to. I would say I would allow people to go and more reach out to maybe the Franchise Tax Board or the IRS for specific questions around that. But I think it really lies about how we outreach to individuals and what we are telling them about the refund. I think that makes the biggest impact.
Mm-hmm. And my sense would be if you go to a VITA site, they're going to be able to give you that kind of specific guidance. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about if a young person went to a VITA site? You know, is that captured anywhere? Can they just go and maybe not file their taxes, but just kind of get the ball rolling? I can imagine a young person might not have every last piece of paper. Can they just go there and take it as far as they can? Can you start your taxes and then finish them later? How does it practically work at the VITA sites? What do those facilities look like, and are they youth-friendly, and what can a young person expect? What can the people on the call tell young people they're working with about these sites?
Well, each VITA site is structured differently because they're all throughout the state. So some are at nonprofits, some are in conjunction with our grantees that are doing the outreach grant. But if a young person comes there, their main role, the main role of VITA site is to prepare those taxes. So if someone comes in and they have their, their paperwork and they're missing something, that VITA volunteer can give them information and feedback about what they need, if they're missing something, anything that they do need that's required. They're really there to give that guidance about filing your taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And you can build a relationship as well. You could start working with a person and then come back later and build that relationship and ask further questions. So they are there for guidance.
Great. Well, and that's really... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say for the VITA sites, like Monisha indicated, of course, if the youth does not have all the information, the volunteers, it's all driven by volunteers, they'll provide them guidance on what's needed to complete their tax returns. But also the other benefit is that many times VITA sites have other organizations there, in particular in the events that Catherine talked about earlier. They routinely hold kickoff events and just events through the year. And at the Cali EITC for Me website, you can get those dates. And during those events, there's many other organizations providing various types of services. They have banks there that are encouraging people to open up accounts so that way they can deposit their return in a bank account. So there's various services that are being offered and that also are targeting youth services, employment services for youth and things of that nature. I know here we participated one here locally in Sacramento at one of the high schools here, and it was really a great turnout, and there was a lot of different types of resources that are available for the youth.
That is really helpful, and it's also just a great message that we're not asking probation officers and social workers and CASAs and financial aid counselors to now become tax preparers. It's the people are there on the ground to help. It's just being the person that connects the young person with these VITA sites. That's the main takeaway here. It's you don't have to have all the answers. The people are there, but motivating the young people and to take them. Well, we have one last question we'll cover, and as a lover of our state's housing programs, I think we'll go ahead with it, which is a young person who's a parenting dependent who lives in THP plus FC. Should the young person file as a head of household? And I think the question that they're getting to is, does somehow being in a transitional housing program change my filing status? Does it make me not kind of eligible to be a head of household? And the answer to that is no. I mean, you may be participating in a housing program, but if you've earned income, you're still a head of household. You're filing your taxes. And again, this is assuming that the person does have a child. So I think with that, we've worked through all of our questions. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for being on today's web seminar. Thank our presenters and both of our state agencies that really stepped up to organize this material and share it with everyone. We will send a link out to all of the registrants, and we'll make sure to include those resources, including how to find how to get a replacement 1098-T. So thanks again, everyone, for being on the web seminar, and this concludes today's web seminar about the Earned Income Tax Credit.